figures out there? Is the system messed up? Good morning. Is the system all messed up? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Well, we don't have Plainview with us until the 17th region figures out that the time has changed. We probably won't have them for a while, so we're going to have to proceed along without them.
I mean, they should be on time because they got an extra hour.
Well, you know it is. Take an inch, or give an inch, give a mile, or whatever that is.
I mean, that was my excuse, so. Oh, the time change, I'm so sorry. I had a chance to turn off the AC.
Are you freezing?
Yeah.
I'm always cold, so. Oh, my goodness.
Always.
What is it at, 68?
It says 68, no wonder why we're cold. Oh dear Lord. Freezing. Thank you so much.
Well, as slow as the system works,
Yeah,
we'll
I
probably be
thought
out of class by the time we warm up.
that's
But
honestly
what I want to do today is start into the, if this fine machine will warm up, is start into the Martin Van Buren presidency. We're going to talk about 3 presidents over the next couple of days: Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, and John Tyler. Then we're going to shift over and talk about the westward movement a little bit, mountain men and stuff like that. But every year I flip a coin about which I'm going to do first. And this year, Martin Van Buren wins. So there's a set of slides that you have now. Temporarily, it's called Unit 9. I may change it to Unit 8 because we really don't have Unit 8. That was getting ready for the exam and things like that. So Unit 9, we'll call it that. And in there's a set of notes, which is about the westward movement, and it also has what we're going to talk about today in it as well. I decided not to break it apart. And there's a PowerPoint about the 3 presidents we're going to talk about right now. So let's see if we can get into that. With any luck, it will function. Don't always have luck, but I think maybe. There it is. bless, it's a little hard.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, a lot of professors offer proposal of extra credit for doing the end of the year survey.
I don't give extra credit for that. I don't like the end of the year surveys. It's the end of semester. We're gonna do that this week, by the way. We're gonna probably do that on Friday. That's your business,
Okay.
okay? If you don't wanna do it, don't do it.
Sounds good.
We appreciate that you do it. They put a lot of pressure on us, generally speaking, and I'm being recorded as I say this, so I'm considering who might be watching the recording. I don't care. I care about the suggestions people may have, and if you've got suggestions and things of that nature, we'd love to have them. What I don't care about is the way that they go about saying, you have to set aside 10 minutes at this such and such a time and all that. It's online, it's available to you, you can do it whenever you want.
I've never done a dirty class before.
And, well, the reason that they got in the habit of doing it in class, number one, there's not enough responses. Number two, it used to be on paper. And it used to be, I don't know, 10 questions or something like that, multiple choice, and you choose what you want, kind of like when these surveys they do on Amazon or something like that, and you can write in comments on it. And very seldom do people really contribute to it. And when the university is being examined for accreditation and all of that, they look at things like that. So we do have to make an effort to do it. I don't care for the way that we do it, but it's available to you. If you look in Blackboard, oh, look who's there. If you look in Blackboard, there's a section that says evaluation. And you click on that, and right now you can get into it. Ooh, I love that blurry. It's making me slightly nauseous. Good morning, Tahoka. Good morning, Hale Center. Ah, they focused finally. Okay. The reason we couldn't see you was not because we didn't set our clocks or anything, but because the region who handles all of this stuff forgot to reset their clocks over the weekend, and so we've been madly trying to get in touch with them, and apparently finally did get in touch with them. I'm not sure how much you've heard about what I'm talking about just now. By the way, the grades of all the exams are done. I don't think you can see them yet. There are several students who have not taken the exam yet. So as soon as that gets done, then the grades will pop up. And also, don't forget that deadline I put in for tonight before midnight. If you don't have all your quizzes in, you will get zeros for them. There's no new quiz, not to worry about it. Most of you are up to date on quizzes, but it could have a horrendous effect on your overall score if you don't get them done. We talked about Jackson's report card or scorecard or whatever you want at the end of his presidency. Take one more look at that and talk about some of the fallout from it. See if I can get this large enough so it can be read. All of the things that he said he was going to do when he started out as president, he did, except for abolishing the Electoral College, which would, of course, have taken a constitutional amendment, and he didn't get that done. He collected debts. He got most favored nation treaties for us. opened up trade in the Caribbean finally. Nobody was messing around with him, especially considering his track record as a general before he became president, when he went down south and caught saboteurs and people like that and strung them up. People realized that when he said he was going to do something, he meant business. He got us out of debt. He started the program to move the Indians, and a whole lot of them were moved in the early and mid 1830s, and more of them will be moved in the first years of Van Buren's presidency. We talked about this new party called the Whigs. Anybody that didn't like Jackson, anyone that didn't like Freemasons. So we'll have two parties now, Democrats and Whigs. The Democrats are a little bit weaker than they were while Jackson was president, because as the result and part of him getting rid of the National Bank and kind of tightening down on our economy to pay our debts off, we end up with the Depression in 1837. And that's going to have some tremendous effects, strange effects. One of them is that people will be going west, looking for jobs because there's a lot of unemployment. Maybe as many as 3 million people out of jobs. Back then, that was a big number. Some working class people, don't want to use the word labor unions really, because they weren't really strong, but working class groups were a little bit unhappy with Jackson's policies, and they were also a little bit unhappy because they felt that they played a major role in getting Jackson elected, and then he didn't do enough for them, at least in their opinion. We talked about that election of 1836. As we were leaving, all the Whigs that ran for president, why were they doing that? Can anybody remember? All of these guys ran hoping to split the electoral votes so that the election would go to Congress, and maybe they could snatch victory from defeat by splitting the votes like that. It didn't work. Martin Van Buren's going to get over 170 electoral votes, which is way over the required 148 to win. In fact, he gets exactly 170. I didn't realize that. I was estimating. And he certainly got a majority of the popular vote, although I'm not really sure if he got over 50% of the popular vote or not. There he is, Martin Van Buren, 8th President of the United States. The cartoon is a picture of Van Buren riding on Andrew Jackson's back into office. It was a political cartoonist reference to the fact that Martin Van Buren probably became president because of Andrew Jackson. They called him the Little Wizard. He wasn't very tall, he was about 5'4", although some people claim he was 5'6", and I don't really care, but he wasn't very tall. He's going to have to be president during the period of this panic of 1837 and the Depression that followed it. He'll be the president while we have the Caroline Affair I'll talk about in a minute. The Aroostook War, it was a war on paper only, mainly. The Amistad Affair. And one thing that he'll get done as president, and he'll get very little done as president, one thing he'll get done is, since we don't have a place to put our money because Jackson destroyed the National Bank, he's going to get an act passed called the Independent Treasury Act, which will give the government a place to store its surplus cash. On the subject of slavery, Martin Van Buren said he was against slavery. But he also said that he wasn't willing to get in a fight over it. He was going to be an opponent of abolishing slavery in the District of Columbia, although there was a big movement for that, because he didn't want to get the slave-holding states and the free states into a major conflict, and he didn't want anyone from one state interfering with another state's business. Caroline Affair. We're going to get into it with the English in a limited sort of way. All started in 1837, about the same time that Van Buren's finishing up with the Trail of Tears, and Winfield Scott's forced to get involved in that. William Lyon Mackenzie and some other Canadians are rebelling against the British government. And to get away from the British government, they hide on an island in the Niagara River, and they've got a lot of support from Americans who live just south of the border. The British authorities are going to go after this guy. They're going to grab the ship, they're going to board it. There's an American crew member on board, he'll be killed. Then they're going to set the ship on fire and send it over the Niagara Falls, which is, a pretty conclusive way to destroy a ship. I don't know if you've ever been to them or not, but there have been a few people that have survived going over the falls, but only very special cases. At any rate, the conclusion of this affair is that General Winfield Scott will be sent up to the area that this is going on, the Niagara area, and basically what he's going to do, this isn't in opposition to the British, he's going to go to Americans up there and tell them, keep your noses out of this British-Canadian rebellion. It's none of your business. Don't cross the border, don't give anyone assistance, because you could get us into a war, and that's stupid. And if you do that, measures will be taken against you. And that more or less satisfied the British government, and it also pretty much squelched Americans doing things like going over the border. There was a big outrage because there was at least one American crew member on this ship that was killed, and they were all drumming up support for doing something to the British for this, and basically our government told them, mind your own business and stay out of it. And so they did.
Who was that?
What?
Who was that?
Who was the general that did that?
Yeah.
General Winfield Scott. He's the same general that was called upon by Andrew Jackson to go down to South Carolina when we were having the nullification crisis. He's a senior general in the Army. They didn't have a chief of staff back then. Some people call him the commanding general of the Army. And he was, let's say, politically adept. I don't mean politically. Maybe I should say diplomatically. He knew how to deal with issues like this. And he did it, even when he went down in the nullification crisis, he did it with a soft hand to avoid causing a war or something of that nature. Now, what comes out of the Caroline affair is something called the Caroline test. You ought to remember this, because one part of the Caroline test, which I didn't mention, or one part of the Caroline affair, which I didn't mention, was that Americans, in retribution for the Caroline being destroyed, grabbed a British-controlled ship and destroyed it too. Which is why Winfield Scott ended up going up there telling Americans to keep their nose out of Canadian business. And there's a principle that was established called preemptive self-defense. Very simple. Preemptive self-defense is, let's do it in playground terms. You walk up to a guy, he pulls his fist back, he's about to smack you in the nose, so you kick him where it hurts before he can hit you. Okay? That's preemptive self-defense. And that's the way the principle is. If the action isn't about to happen right now, it can't be called preemptive self-defense. It must be instant, overwhelming, and leave no choice before you strike out, before you've been struck. But that all comes out of the Caroline affair. It's kind of interesting that this kind of tempest in a teapot, which could have been a war, but it left behind this Caroline test. And in recent years, we've used preemptive self-defense. And sometimes it's questionable whether it would pass the Caroline test or not. Another war, about a year later, and it's called the Aroostook War. It wasn't a war. There were no military forces involved in fighting. Way, way back, after the War of 1812, the British had occupied territory belonging to Maine, or back then Massachusetts, and when the war's over and the Treaty of Ghent is signed, we more or less established a border. But what the British claimed as a border in 1821 and what we claimed as a border in 1821 were quite different. If you look at the slide, let's look at the right-hand one. The blue line is more or less what the Americans claimed, and the red line is more or less what the British claimed, quite a bit further south. And there are all sorts of definitions about it ran along a line of where water drained into this river or that river and that sort of thing. And the people up there were mainly foresters and people of that nature. And 1837-ish, somewhere around that time, you started getting some conflicts between rival loggers and also rival tax collectors, and Americans attempting, officials from Maine attempting to do a census up there, and being arrested by British authorities, and then British sending authorities down further south and being arrested by American authorities, et cetera, et cetera. And at one point, Maine is going to call up militia. And the British are going to bring some troops in from the Caribbean, I think. Each side's going to set up forts on different sides of rivers, a lot of them facing each other. No military force got in a fight. But eventually this becomes so obnoxious, and it's an issue in Congress, that President Van Buren sends, once again, General Winfield Scott up there to defuse the situation. Now, during the War of 1812, Winfield Scott, at one point, he was a pretty good young officer, but at one point, he was captured by the British and got to know some of the British senior officers. And of course, when the war was over, he was released long before then, but developed some mutual respect with some British military officers who were still up there. And so he was pretty adept at, instead of doing his negotiations over a gun barrel, doing his negotiations over a cup of tea. And basically what the military officers agreed was, we don't want to get in this lumberjack war between people fighting over land. And a lot of land had been sold in kind of the no man's land between where each side estimated their borders to be. So the military agreed, we're going to let the diplomats handle this, and what we'll do is we'll keep the peace. In other words, if people on our side are doing something they shouldn't be doing, we'll take care of it, and if people on your side are doing something they shouldn't be doing, you take care of it. And from time to time they met. The officers from both sides met. There was, by this time, a regular American Army unit up there and some British units, and they got along pretty well. And this is all going to be settled. You can read about it if you want. It's going to be settled in 1842 with a treaty. By the way, the other name for the war was the Pork and Beans War. Lord knows where it got. But the treaty will be done by Daniel Webster and Lord Ashburton of England. And they'll settle the final line, which is that yellow line on this map. On this map, and it's kind of a funny looking blue looking line on this one. So they kind of split the difference. By the way, They even called in an intermediary because of an earlier treaty. They called in an intermediary, and King William of Holland is going to be asked to sort this out. And he finally throws his hands up in the air and says it's too complicated. He sorted out a few things. He made a suggested separating line and said, that's all, I don't want to have anything else to do with it. Whereupon Daniel Webster and Lord Ashburton started discussing it. One outcome of this, besides getting the border settled, is that the federal government is going to make it clear to state governments that you don't go to war with other countries. That's the business of the federal government, not the business of any state. And of course, that principle is still in existence, and is part of the debate about, for example, our southern border right now. Then there's the story of the Armistead. The Armistead was a schooner traveling along the coast of Cuba, Spanish-owned. On board it had slaves. The slaves were Mende people from around the area of Sierra Leone. That's on the west coast of Africa. And somewhere along the line, when we talk about slavery, I'll show you where it is. It's a place where the British put a lot of freed slaves that wanted to go back to Africa. They were sold into slavery. They were transported to Cuba on a Portuguese ship. This is against the laws, against treaties that we had with Spain and other countries. But once they reached Cuba, the Spanish regarded them as slaves. They hadn't banned slavery, they just banned the slave trade. These many people, as they're being brought from one port in Cuba to another port, rose up, killed the captain, killed the cook. That's a good guy to kill. And two other crew members escaped in a lifeboat. They held on to the navigator, navigators in plural, and they told them, you'll be safe as long as you take us back to Africa. But the navigators were sneaky guys, and at nighttime, when the Africans who weren't trained in navigation weren't aware of what was happening, they steered the ship right to New York. It was intercepted, apprehended if you want, near Long Island by the U.S. Revenue Cutter from the United States Revenue Cutter Service. That's what we call the Coast Guard now, and taken into custody. There are going to be federal court cases about this ship. On the one side, Spain wants their ship back, and they want their slave property back. On the other side, people argue that the slaves were illegally made into slaves, and that the ship was a prize of war because our military had captured it, and you can't have your ship back. It's interesting what our federal government wants to do. In the state of New York, the people all want the slaves freed, and they want the ship seized, and they want even to force the owners of the ship to pay for the slaves to be transported back to Africa, if they so desire. The U.S. government doesn't want to get in a war with Spain, and the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee comes out taking the side of the Spanish rather than taking the side of the slaves. Strangely enough, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee is a fellow that you know. His name is John C. Calhoun, former vice president, now senator from South Carolina. The trial, first in a federal district court, finds that transporting kidnapped Africans across the Atlantic Ocean was in violation of laws and accepted treaties against international slave trade signed by Britain, Ireland, Spain, and the United States. The captives were ruled to have acted as free men when they fought to escape their kidnapping and the illegal confinement. The court ruled the Africans were entitled to take whatever legal measures necessary to secure their freedom, including use of force. It's not over yet. It's going to the Supreme Court, and strangely enough, the U.S. government is appealing this verdict. It's the United States versus the Armistead. Martin Van Buren ordered the case appealed in the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is going to affirm the lower district court ruling in 1841. And it authorizes the release of the Africans. It overthrows the lower court that they have to be returned to Africa at government expense. I mentioned John C. Calhoun in the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. I didn't mention a very important representative from the state of Massachusetts who argued on behalf of the slaves before the Supreme Court. And his name was John Quincy Adams. Remember, he's the only president in our history to be elected to the legislature after serving as president. And he will spend the rest of his time on and off. He's not in the House of Representatives all the way till his death, but on and off he is a member, and he will argue abolition of slaves, in favor of abolition of slavery, all the way until his death. Okay, enough adventures with Martin Van Buren. I should mention one other thing he did. Let's look at this slide thing. One more time. The one thing he got done in Congress was the Independent Treasury Act, and the other thing he did was the Indian removal. He was just carrying out something that had already been started by Andrew Jackson. And General Winfield Scott was forced into the position of overseeing that. He very happily escaped from those duties to go up and help settle the Aroostook War up north. So he's got all sorts of jobs he's doing, none of which is really fighting a war. Okay, let's talk about that election. 1840, the Whigs have a new idea. Since trying to have 4 candidates didn't work, let's pick a war hero. After all, that's how the Democrats won the election. That's how Andrew Jackson got elected. Let's pick a war hero. And they go looking around for a war hero. And who do they find but William Henry Harrison, now of Ohio. What battle did William Henry Harrison win? A very famous one. In fact, it's part of his campaign slogan. They choose as his, by the way, Henry Clay wanted to run as a Whig candidate, and they passed him by. And to make him happy, they picked a Virginian who they thought saw eye to eye with Henry Clay by the name of John Tyler from Virginia. They really didn't know him very well, but they thought, well, he'll do. I mean, after all, vice presidents don't really matter. That was their point of view. So the Whigs will put up William Henry Harrison and John Tyler. Martin Van Buren will be put up as the Democratic candidate, and strangely enough, Democrats will put up 3 vice presidential candidates: Richard Mentor Johnson of Kentucky, Littleton Tazewell of Virginia, and James Polk of Tennessee. James Polk, I think at this stage of the game, was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. It was kind of a wild election. There was another party involved. Actually, there were several parties now that were separate. The Whig Party was the biggest opposition party. Then you had a party that was just purely about opposition to Masons called the Anti-Masonic Party. And then you had the Liberty Party, brand new party, and its only cause was abolishing slavery. James Birney would be their candidate. Thomas Earl would be their vice presidential candidate. They're not gonna get any electoral votes. They kinda don't count, but they're out there, and eventually they'll have a little bit more influence. The only thing disputed in this election, Martin Van Buren's gonna lose. Candidates for vice president, John Tyler, and candidate for president, William Henry Harrison, of the Whig Party will win. Let's talk about William Henry Harrison's long presidency. What did he do as president? Oh, by the way, there's the outcome of the election. There were some disputed areas, but we need not worry about it. There he is, 9th President of the United States, Whig. He was backed by Henry Clay and Daniel Webster. Why did they back him? That's interesting. Why did they back him? Let's talk about the election was kind of neat. They had election slogans. I told you they called William Henry Harrison Old Tippecanoe. They also called him Granny Harrison if they were against him. Up to that time, he was the oldest man to be elected president. He was 68 years old. Of course, nowadays we've had some older. I think President Reagan's the oldest man elected president. The Democratic Review said about William Henry Harrison, give him a barrel of hard cider, a pension of $2,000 a year, and he'll sit the remainder of his days in his log cabin. They were making fun of him because he was an old man. They drew the log cabin to make fun of him. The Whigs took the symbol of the log cabin and made it their party symbol. And the Democrats have said, we've taught them to conquer us. We taught them how to beat us. The Whigs made fun of Martin Van Buren. They had this little ditty, this little song they sang. Old Tip, he wore a homespun coat. He had no ruffled shirt. But Matt, he has the golden plate. And he's a little squirt. They were casting Martin Van Buren as a wealthy man, kind of John Adams style or something like that. And they were casting William Henry Harrison as an old country boy to gain favor, kind of like Andrew Jackson or something like that. The joke is that William Henry Harrison was rich and Martin Van Buren wasn't. That doesn't matter, right? The truth seldom matters when you're campaigning. Now, why did Henry Clay finally agree to back this man, and why did Daniel Webster finally agree to back this man? In their minds, they had the thought that let's elect William Henry Harrison president. He's old and doddering, so we'll kind of control him from the rear. He'll kind of be our figurehead president, and we'll do things we want to do. And they helped him. He picked a cabinet. Secretary of State would be Daniel Webster. John Bell will be the Secretary of War. John Crittenden will be the Attorney General, et cetera, et cetera. On the 4th of March, William Henry Harrison goes to make his inaugural address. It's drizzling. The speech is one of the longest inaugural speeches ever made. William Henry Harrison catches a cold. It develops into pneumonia. And William Henry Harrison dies after about a month in office. That's the shortest presidency in history. Now we've got John Tyler. Nobody knows John Tyler. Not even Henry Clay, and they picked him because they thought Henry Clay would be happy about it. Surprise, surprise, surprise. What these guys wanted to do was get the national bank reestablished. And they had a plan for that. They wanted to start building more roads and things like that, and they had a plan for that. And they were going to steer William Henry Harrison into doing all of that. But now he's gone, and John Tyler is the president. Wonder if we can control him? Answer's no. He was against the American system that Henry Clay loved so much. He was in favor of states' rights. Whoops. John Quincy Adams described him as a political sectarian of slave-driving Virginian Jeffersonian school, principled against all improvement, with all the interests and passions and ices of slavery rooted in his moral and political constitution. John Quincy Adams always judged you by whether you were pro-slavery or anti-slavery. Henry Clay says maybe we can do it anyway. So, as a first step to getting the national bank, they vote to repeal the Independent Treasury Act. Then the government once again doesn't have a place to put money, so they'll have to have the national bank. So they repealed the Independent Treasury Act, the president signed it. Then they passed a bill to establish the national bank, and the president vetoed it. Oops. Stalwart supporter, advocate of states' rights. Here's his little speech that he prepared for his cabinet. They were all, remember, appointees of Benjamin Harrison. I beg your pardon, gentlemen. I'm very glad to have in my cabinet such able statesmen as you have proved yourselves to be. And I shall be pleased to avail myself of your counsel and advice. But I can never consent to be dictated to as to what I shall or shall not do. I, as president, shall be responsible for my administration. I hope to have your hearty cooperation in carrying out its measures. So long as you see fit to do this, I shall be glad to have you with me. When you think otherwise, your resignations will be accepted. And with the exception of Daniel Webster, they all quit. Daniel Webster was a little short on money, needed the job, so he didn't quit. Then he thought maybe he could do some things anyway. He ran foreign policy pretty much. There's the veto of the National Bank bill. Cabinet resigns. He's going to do some good work as a Secretary of State. First of all, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty is going to be signed in 1842. It's named after Daniel Webster and Baron Ashburton of England, the British special negotiator. They're going to settle the Maine-New Brunswick border. They're also going to get together on interrupting international slave trade by patrolling the west coast of Africa. Naval patrols. We were a little touchy about that because the British sometimes would want to board American ships to see if they had slaves or slave paraphernalia on board. So we made a deal with them. You tip us off if you catch an American ship, we'll come and inspect the ship for you. And we'll do the same for you. Also, they agreed that we need to have somewhat warmer relations to get along with each other so that every time we have a disagreement, it doesn't break into another war. So all in all, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty was quite an achievement. Look at our country, too, by the way. At the beginning of the century, we had 5.3 million people. By the time we get up to where we are, what we're talking about now, we've got over 17 million. So our population had more than tripled. That's incredible growth. It's not doing anything like that now. John Tyler would like to be president again, but he's not going to get reelected. Because he'd already ticked off the Whigs, and of course the Democrats have their own candidate, so they're going to run their candidate. And we get the election of 1844. Before we get there, there's a couple of other things. Besides Webster Ashburton, there was another incident called the Creole Incident. It's spelled C-R-E-O-L-E. There's not a slide in there. But basically, this is a ship loaded with slaves that left the Hampstead Roads area, that's Norfolk and Portsmouth, up at the mouth of the Chesapeake, en route to Louisiana. They were moving slaves from Virginia to Louisiana. The slaves rose up, seized control of the ship, and sailed it to the Bahamas. Guess what? In 1837, Britain had not only banned the international slave trade, but they banned slavery in all British territories. So when those slaves arrived at the Bahamas, they, of course, were free men. And there was a big incident between us and the British about American property now. Now we're in the position of the Spanish in the Amistad Affair. Go figure. Let's talk about the election of 1844. Let's see what we've got in the slides. One thing that's going to happen all of this time that's going to start is immigration. Where is it? I'm looking for the election of 1844. Where'd you go, election? I'm going to go back and talk about all this stuff later. Don't have it on you. Okay. It's on a different set of slides, and we don't really have time to get to it. Let's talk about it. In 1844, Henry Clay is going to run for president. There is an issue. What do you call it? There's something in the closet that nobody wants to, there's something in the room that nobody wants to mention. The elephant in the room. The elephant in the room, and we'll talk about it when we talk about westward movement, is a little country that's on our border now, in between us and Mexico, called the Republic of Texas. And ever since they got their independence from Mexico in 1836, they've been knocking on the door saying, can we become a state, please? Can we become part of the United States, please? After all, most of us are Americans, and even those of us who aren't Americans would like to be. It happened while Andrew Jackson was still president. And he told them, surprisingly, he supported what they were doing in Texas. He was in favor of it. Sam Houston was a friend. But he said, the time isn't right. The time isn't right for you to become a state. We're going to have to put it off because it wouldn't be good for our country right now. Why? Why would Andrew Jackson say that? And Martin Van Buren after him said the same thing. And John Tyler did for most of his presidency. What's the problem? Remember the Missouri Compromise? What was the problem then? Balance between pro-slave state and anti-slave state. Or free state versus slave state, put it that way. And everybody knew, even though it was against the law all the time they belonged to Mexico, that the Republic of Texas had slavery. So it was predetermined. And Jackson knew it would cause major trouble if he shifted the balance in the Senate. And Van Buren understood the same thing. And Tyler Tyler didn't want to go against all these people because he knew it would cause trouble. Henry Clay, when he's campaigning for president, talks about the American system and this and that and the other thing. But he never mentions anything about the prospect of Texas becoming a state. On the Democratic side, an interesting thing happens. The last Democratic president was Martin Van Buren. It would be logical to think that maybe they would run him again. But in fact, they skipped him. Southern supporters of Van Buren didn't like his attitude about Texas getting statehood. So they vote, and they vote again. This time it takes 9 ballots in their convention. And finally, because nobody's favorite son wins, they pick somebody that's acceptable to everyone. He's the Speaker of the House. His name is James K. Polk. And there's also a shadow back in the background that gives this the nod. Who is the most powerful, would you guess, is the most politically powerful man in the United States who's not in office? He's still the national hero. He's living in his little place, the Hermitage, not in very good health. What's his name? Come on, guys. Old Hickory. Andrew Jackson. Polk is a protege of Andrew Jackson. Also happens to be from Tennessee, which doesn't hurt. What does Polk promise? We'll talk about what Polk promises to do if he's elected next time around. Thank you very much.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
What's up?
Howdy.
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.